Welcome to this edition of MDM Live, September 25th, 2020. And I am joined once again by my co-host, Michael Marks from Indian River Consulting Group. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Sean. It's good to be here.
Good to be with you again. It's been about a month since we were last together on this program, and a lot has happened.
Yes.
And that's really going to form our topics and theme today. Really is just to do an update in terms of what we're seeing as far as the where Q3 is going and ending up here, and what's happened since we last talked a little bit, and talk about some of the emerging themes that have really come out. MDM did some pretty significant research over the summer with our audience, and I wanted to share a few of the key themes and talk with you about that in terms of what you're seeing as well out there. And then in the last half hour of our 1 hour together today, we will talk with Scott Bebenek, Vice President of the Industrial Buying Group, IBC.
It's going to be fun.
It will be. Scott's got a really broad perspective and industry perspectives, and he's absolutely going to bring to us some of his insights from what he's hearing from his members and suppliers, and that'll be a good part of the conversation as well. So just a reminder that we are always monitoring the chat and Q&A. If you have questions, please let us know. We really would like to make this as interactive as possible at any point. So with that, Mike, let's kick it off. I guess, you know, the first thing is, how are you doing? I mean, what's been up with you?
We're all sort of feeling like one-legged man at a butt-kicking contest. You know, if you just kind of look at what happened with the pandemic, as we got into Q2, everybody was kind of like, you know, shock and awe, we're reacting. And so what's happened is we're entering Q4 now. There's an awful lot of folks that basically said, well, this isn't going to go away. It's not going to go back to January. We need to get on with it. And Mike Emerson, our partner that leads all the comp practice, you know, is just sinking under the tide in terms of everybody trying to change things for when this thing starts to come back. And I know you're going to share some of the forecast data you put together, which I think is pretty interesting. So we've gotten very busy. Things are different. And in terms of sort of the urgency, it's a normal thing. Everybody's sort of been, I should say everybody, a lot of people have been sort of paralyzed and thinking about it. And now all of a sudden they said, all right, this is going to be with us for a while. Let's get on with it. And now everybody's in a hurry to get everything going. So, yeah. And the meetings and the training and the trade associations have pulled off some very successful virtual meetings, and which nobody would have ever done if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And so we're just figuring it all out.
Yeah.
I'm flying back on airplanes again. It's kind of neat to be able to go through the airport. There's no TSA pre-lines anymore because there's no traffic, and you walk up to a TSA guy, he's happy to, oh, I got a customer. So it's very different.
Yeah. You know, I would just say that, well, you know, you contrast it with the end of March when we started to do this on a weekly basis throughout the Q2, which, you know, absolutely was the trough of this year. And, you know, there's still so much uncertainty out there, but at the same time, what we're seeing, and we'll be sharing a little bit of this too today, is just that how people are really have, and we've heard it a lot, but people are pivoting, and they really are starting to look forward again. And not only that, but they are really starting to see some opportunities that all of the downturn has presented in terms of doing some things that were difficult in the past to kind of get out of the legacy business model and really start to do some things differently.
Agreed. Although there's a lot of people that aren't. So
we're going to be talking about that gap because it's a big gap and it's getting bigger.
Yeah.
So let's start off, Mike. Let's talk a little bit in terms of financial. Indian River started your distributor weekly pandemic revenue index. Yep. And I would like to just kick it off with that.
Well, sure. As you know, we started this thing and we had a number of distributors, and I would say generally that most of these distributors I would have considered in their various trade association probably top quartile. So they're well managed, profitable, that kind of thing. And what we asked them to do is compare this week's sales compared to the exact same week in 2019 and just give us a percentage change. And so and Mike Emerson updates this every week from the sample that comes in. He does a couple smaller ones for separate groups where people just want to see one particular industry. And you know, you saw the big dips, and now everybody's kind of waiting to see what the trend is. One of the things that's kind of interesting here is that, and people are using the term, there's going to be a K-level recovery. You know, we're talking about B's and U's and L's and everything, and now they're talking about K's. And part of it is that, you know, there's some folks that are going to come back really well, and there are other folks that are just in a whole lot of trouble. And I think a lot of it has to do with the structural change in a lot of these industries. If you were a food service distributor and most of your business was in a major metropolitan area serving restaurants and the rest of it, you've had a religious experience as people kind of gone through it. And the people that serviced hospitality in terms of vacation areas and the rest of it, it's really tough. But yet you go to the other side, and there's folks, if you look at a lot of the construction and sort of the core businesses that drive this, MRO, industrial stuff's looking good. There's a whole lot of things. So we're starting to see everybody, if you look at the media, they talks about, well, we're one flavor. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? It's getting a lot better for some people and still really crappy. That's a technical term for a lot of others. So the range is getting bigger, Tom. And so it's getting really hard to talk about how all of us are doing because we're all doing so differently today. And people keep asking, how long are we going to keep doing this? And we're going to keep doing this as long as people are interested. A lot of trade associations are posting, and it's a data point, and it's just good to see, you know, is it good news or bad news? And the other thing I think is going to be interesting, and several people have asked us to keep it up through the fall, because there's sort of an expectation we're going to have more COVID adventures in the fall, and they want to see what that was going to do to the economics. So, I mean, we'll just keep doing it and see what happens. It's just one data point.
Yeah. So you've got 12 firms in the sample size this week. Can you share aggregate revenues, or does that start to?
But there are two commas in the answer, so we're up in the billions, if that helps. And
Okay.
and so it's not a bunch of little guys, but
Yep.
they're not all giant distributors either. So we've
Yep.
got a real mix, and we've covered both industrial. We have a good mix of the various large scale industries in terms of what we're looking at. So I mean, it's not. The point is, we're just trying to provide a trend. It's not like this is necessarily, you know, everybody's got to look at this and reference their business, but it certainly gives people a sense of where things are. And we've also had a lot of suppliers who've been pretty interested in this as well.
If nothing else this year, what has been proven is that how important benchmarks of all types are, just to try to get a read as far as the, you know, what the heck is going on from one week to the next. So it's been a real service.
Yeah, well, but you bring up a really interesting point, because we've all had we've all been kicked in the stomach. Some of us got right back up again. Some of us are still trying to get up. But what was really funny with this, if you go back and look on the left side back in May, a lot of folks were really depressed, and they said, this cheered me up, because I don't suck nearly as bad as the other guys do. So, you know, you need those benchmarks. How am I doing, coach? You know?
Absolutely. And the more, the better to triangulate, really.
Yep.
All right.
Well, so I think your forecast is probably the next thing, because it seemed to square with what we look at the Financial Times and what the Economist magazine's doing. It's really interesting how tight this forecast is you guys got.
Yeah. So, and the caveat here is this is still the forecast that we put together in the month following. So this was put together in mid-July in terms of running all the models that go into this. And there's a methodology here that we talk about more. I'm not going to go into it here, but basically what we're doing and going forward is we're putting together a quarterly markets forecast here for distribution, and we do it for individual sectors as well. This is the aggregate across all of the $6 trillion industry. What this provides is both a baseline, middle ground forecast going forward for 2 years, as well as an optimistic and pessimistic. And you know, clearly this shows the trough that happened in Q2. You know, we're going to be coming back out. In fact, when we have our live next month, we'll have an update to this for Q3. So we'll have more to talk about here. what I wanted to share here is so far it's proving out pretty well in terms of continuing to point to, Q1, people are talking about, and there's been some recent economic data that shows that there's been a little bit more of a bounce back, some more pent up demand across a number of sectors. And so, things are looking a little bit positive, but gosh, there's so much uncertainty here. We're going in the elections, all the different parts of that, and who knows, honestly. So we feel this is really valid to try to, again, triangulate with both an optimistic, pessimistic band to really, in terms of doing the stress testing that we talked about earlier, Mike, and you went through, is you've got to bring in these kind of benchmarks and parameters to do the kind of stress testing in terms of where you're going to end up and what can happen and what that looks like. So bottom line here, we're still on track. I'll be really interested to see what the updated forecast looks like a month from now for Q3 and going forward for the next 2 years. But right now, Q1 is still going to be a climb out, and it's really going to be Q2 and going forward that we're going to see sustained growth in 2021. I mean, right now, this forecast is pointing out sort of the median, about a 3% growth rate overall. And the last 3 quarters are going to drive that in 2021. 2022, we've got about 10% scenario in terms of growth rate. And so it's actually pretty healthy overall.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead.
Well, just this also squares, the thing I like about this is about our industry, and this squares with a lot of the big global guys in terms of where it's going. And for those folks that think the world is ended and is never going to come back, notice all 3 of those forecasts converge, as we get out well into 2022. And so we went through, we're doing some work with Europeans, and they were talking European distributors, and they were all very, it's horrible. And all I did is I put up a chart showing what it was like when you were trying to be a distributor in Germany and you were getting firebombed in World War II. And I mean, if you look at the overall economy, yeah, there's dips, but notice Tom's forecast. It's all going to come back, and it's going to get bigger, and the economy is going to continue to grow. I mean, if you even just look at housing starts and new home sales in terms of from the National Association of Home Builders, all their stuff actually squares with this. And the interesting thing, if you look at the LIRA index from the Joint Center of Housing Studies in terms of remodeling, what basically happens, if you notice the spread between the red and the dotted green line, normally they always have 2 spreads where sort of their regular forecast and pessimistic. And the only thing that happened is that big gap that we have with the red going out here into 2021, they've expanded there. So if you think about it, it's like it's sighting in a rifle scope. You put it on a bench rest, fire a bunch of rounds, and if they're all down the lower left, you just move the crosshairs. This is absolutely consistent, and it's coming back. The issue is, what's it going to come back to? It's going to be a very different work experience.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into people's response to what's been going on here. And Mike, we've talked about it before. We did a webcast a couple of weeks ago where we really dove into sort of the 3 dominant themes that have been really emerging here for this year. And the first I want to talk about here is about the hunkering down versus the investing. And this is the gap that we talked about. And gosh, every day that's just being reinforced in terms of what you're seeing for how people are performing in their specific markets out there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just, I learned something interesting last week, and it kind of set me back a little bit because, Tom, we're involved with these companies. Everybody's trying to re-engineer, redesign things. Those are our clients. So I hadn't realized that I created a bias because the people that are paying us money and working with us are the ones that are trying to re-engineer their business and bring in analytics and all this. And so I just sort of assumed a lot of people were. And I was with a group of people that a lot of these were different industry, will not say who, but there's a thing in martial arts in the military called target fixation. And I realized that I'm only seeing the people that are innovating. There's a larger group of people that aren't doing anything. And with this hunker down, when I talk about target fixation, this was such a shock to them that they feel that they're very engaged, but what they're trying to do is work through the pandemic, and they have the view that I have to get through this pandemic, and then I'll think about doing something different. And so they feel that they're engaged and they're hunkering down, and they just have this view that we got to deal with the pandemic first, and then we'll talk about changing the business. And it's just the idea that they should be doing something in the middle of this was really sent them back a bit. I realized they're actually in the majority right now, Tom. It's kind of weird.
So I wanted to just share a couple of things from our survey of our audience of 20,000 plus here just in the last couple of months. And just to go to what you said, we took a risk-seeking approach with labor and in inventory, i.e. invested, and got comfortable very quickly with Zoom. They went a little more deeply into that, but basically very quickly they started to reorient the way they took a look at their existing team, the kind of roles and skill sets that they needed to have in place because it changed overnight. And again, got comfortable very quickly with Zoom. And I happen to know that they made some changes out in terms of bringing in some people who could adapt much more quickly. And you know, it was a painful process, but they got very strategic about how they had to get the right people in the right seats, but also in terms of how they identified their weak points and where they needed to invest quickly to really shift some of the way that they could go to market most effectively this year and going forward.
It's interesting to see how everybody's taking a little different approach to it. But to me, what you're seeing now in the fourth quarter is that I think a larger percentage of people are starting to actively engage in some of this right now, and I expect to see even more change in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other aspects of the surveys that we've been doing here, the investment specifically into digital has accelerated. You know, that's been the big shift that's taken place here. Is those people who are investing as quickly as possible, they really are trying to put it into how they can automate and how they can digitize their businesses more effectively. And with that, I want to go. So Mike, you and I follow McKinsey closely. They just came out the other day, a couple of days ago, with a survey, and the link is here. I highly recommend that you find that at mckinsey.com and take a look at it. 800 business executives, and talking specifically about how these executives are changing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me just walk through this, because in that first column is really digitization of supply chain, and basically about a third have either significantly or somewhat accelerated their digitization of their supply chain. That means that about 2/3 aren't really doing much of anything. In that next column, digitization of customer channels, it's actually a little bit bigger number that are actually doing something right now. That third one, 85% of companies have accelerated digitization around employee interactions.
Say that fast.
That's kind of an obvious thing. This last one is what's really interesting to me, because about 2/3 have accelerated their automation and AI investments this year. And you know, prior to this year, that's kind of been Star Wars stuff, or it just hasn't been a priority. And what you're just seeing is, you know, in terms of sales order automation, I mean, it's just happening across a lot of different parts of the business. So to me, this is the takeaway from this slide here, is really where the biggest impact here is that investment in both automation and AI. Again, I think it's going to be 2021 before you see the full force of that impact in distribution channels specifically.
Well, and artificial intelligence, instead of being like this really big scary thing, there's a lot of bite-sized things that are showing up. And if you think about it, what software company is going to go spend money to put one of these things together if they don't think they have a market? And there's a lot of granular tools out. I think one of the things you were talking about with your sales GPS was to go through and provide a review of some of these things. It's kind of exciting to see all the new stuff coming out.
Absolutely. Here's the other one of the other graphics from this McKinsey survey that I wanted to share. And this talks about the roles in terms of increase in hiring in 2020 because of COVID-19. And if you take a look here, again, somewhat obvious in terms of health and safety, on-site distancing, sanitizing, workforce safety and health. Those are the huge increases in terms of hiring. People are doing that to create safe workplaces for both their employees, but also for customers to be able to come and do business. This middle part here is what the really interesting thing is for me. And going back to that, the automation and AI investment and what people are doing in terms of accelerating there. This technology and automation piece has got me in terms of, here are some of the new roles that are coming into place. 35% of those 800 execs said that they are hiring in the roles for automation and AI, digital customer experience, Internet of Things, cloud, cybersecurity, data and analytics, internet company network. And that's the smallest piece in terms of actual, some of the more infrastructure type stuff. This is all more really strategic, competitive positioning type work that needs to get done, and typically hadn't been, sort of front and center in terms of roles in companies. Again, I think we're going to see a lot more of that in distribution in 2021, but we're already seeing that, and it's coming out in our surveys too, in terms of how people are starting to invest there as well.
Well, the people that we're working with, you have titles like Senior VP of Customer Experience, based what's customer journey map, how do we take friction out of it? You don't have your IT guy doing digital. That's sort of the old school view. That's somebody that runs an ERP, but there's like a chief digital officer that, and a lot of this is being driven more by marketing than sales. And so you're starting to see all these titles. It was really interesting. We teach a course in big data at the University of Innovative Distribution. And one of the things we talk about is a profile of a data scientist. And we first started to teach this course a couple of years ago. Everybody, how many people have a data scientist? Ask for hands. And everybody just looks at each other and nobody raised their hands. But now you're starting to see a lot of people that put it, that have one, and they're trying to figure out what it is. So these are things, if you go back even a couple of years, these would have been very small bar charts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the gap between the people that are innovating, those that are sort of hunkering down, waiting to get past COVID before they do anything.
Yep, absolutely. The final piece over here on the right side of it is around the digital learning aspects as well. And obviously people are starting to hire people to facilitate that internally, where before that really wasn't on the radar screen at all. So, to me, this was just a little bit of a leading indicator in terms of where things are shifting in terms of jobs, roles, and how people are starting to view, how work is being redefined going forward. So that I thought it was important to share this.
I'd like to throw one thing in here, and and we've seen this several places, that if a distributor is deciding to start to enter this, make sure that the senior executive, the CEO or president, they don't necessarily have to report to you, but if you just bring them in and stick them in the IT department or stick them in sales, they're not going to stay very long. They're not going to have much impact. This needs very strong CEO involvement. You don't need to run it, let them do the work, but this whole thing, the organization will, like a white blood cell, will kill this new thing that's not normal because it's breaking up the routine. So these new roles need support.
Well, not only that, Mike, but I would argue that the organization needs a whole new way of looking at what the structures look like, from a much more traditionally siloed, hierarchical, departmental view to much more of a networked, it's really more of an agile network type of a team where you put together small project teams to get very specific things done on a priority basis, rather than these big hairy projects. And just as an example of that, but we've just been forced to work remotely, and by that means I think it's just reinforcing how much more effective it can be to have, what can you get done with 4 or 6 people on a call versus 20, right?
Right.
So.
It's fun to watch everybody go through that. The other thing that kind of goes along with this is, if you look at most organizations in distribution, there's been an accelerating trend away from branches that are P&L centers that kind of roll up, where we have a feudal organization structure. You know, the king had the little barons all around, and most companies are finding to leverage this kind of technology and get the economic benefits, both in terms of growth and profit. They're moving to functional and hybrid matrix organizations and the rest of where these people fit in. And those people that are hunkering down, that gap between the people innovating and the ones that are hunkering down is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Now, it remains to be seen, you know, there's a lot. I had a hunker down guy that said, well, you know, the fundamentals aren't going to change. It's about selling service with excellent people. And I just nod my head. And he thinks a lot of these people are just wasting a lot of money with consultants and software guys. So the market will keep us all honest.
It will, and we'll see where we end up, and we'll be talking about it next year.
I'm sure we will.
How things are shaping up. Final slide I wanted to share in this series, and this is the last slide of the day, and I know many of you have seen this because this is something actually that I started using last year before we got into 2020. And what was added here is just the acceleration that took place. But these are all pieces of how distribution models have been changing. But just to talk through this really quickly, the financial model piece here, I mean, obviously back in March, the critical thing was really to protect and survive. And it was all about the balance sheet and where you were. Again, going back to this notion of a gap, Mike, you know, those who had healthy balance sheets were the ones who were able to be in a position to start to look forward to invest. Whereas those who weren't in such a good position, really had to kind of have a baseline budget in place, a survival mode, and you know, everybody's along the spectrum right now. What these different areas out here in terms of digital talent, sales model, and analytics, to me, these are the key levers, and these aren't new. This has been going on for a long time. But 2020 really has accelerated the ways in which people are now investing and really looking at these areas specifically in terms of how they can move the company forward and where the weaknesses are, where their strengths are, and really how to reorient it into a much more, I said it before, but a agile and adaptive type organization just to deal with all the turbulence that is going to continue to happen here going forward.
Oh, I think so too. We got a question coming in, and I think this chart goes right to the heart of it. And the question was, do you think there will finally be rationalization of distributors and suppliers with failing business models exiting or going out of business? And you know, that's one of those 50,000 foot questions. Everybody's got an opinion, but what essentially happens here is I can take friction out of the customer experience with technology. Brent Grover, one of the NAW research fellows, said, I said, why do you get so much money when you sold your company? He said, simple. I had the best people got me the best customers. The best customers got me the best suppliers. There's a ton of work going on in talent right now. The sales model lets people take your generalist salespeople and separate market serving from market making. And the analytics help you make better investment decisions so you don't keep investing in things that aren't working. So my answer to that question is that these tools are going to create competitors that are going to be able to sell at a much lower price than the old school guys. And the customers are the ones that are going to force them out of business, because I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe the customer is going to choose the best offer or best alternative that they have. And if I can provide a better experience to the customer and do it at a lower price, that's really tough to compete against. And so I think that's what's going to finally shake this thing out. But that's just an opinion. Everybody's got their own, and the economy keeps us all honest.
One more question here, and this is actually the question from Mark is a good segue to bring in our guest, because another part of this I want to talk about in terms of the rationalization of distributors and suppliers is about the impact of buying marketing groups and what that looks like vis-a-vis the nationals and how things shape out. And I'm going to venture a guess that Scott might have one or two opinions about that.
Well, I know that Scott will. This will be fun. So, you have a mute button?
Let me bring him on now, and
perfect.
Then I want to get to, so Scott, if you start your video and unmute yourself, we should be good. I think if you just, there you go.
There he is.
Thanks.
Hey, man.
Scott,
How are
welcome.
you today, gentlemen?
We're doing well.
Living the dream.
Well, thank you very much on behalf of myself and my company for allowing me to ride shotgun with you for the next 30 minutes.
It's a pleasure. Scott, just to kick things off, tell us a little bit about IBC and about yourself, please.
Sure. I've been with IBC for about 1.5 years now. I started in April of last year. Prior to IBC, I worked for a purchasing cooperative of industrial, safety, power transmission bearing, and fluid power distributors out of Canada. For 12.5 years, I was their president. And that group was called IDI. And I really brought a lot of the experiences from IDI to my role at IBC as VP of the buying group. We prided ourselves at IDI at really stretching the traditional boundaries of the group purchasing organization model. And so now over at IBC, which is what I think is more pertinent right now, we're a buying group of industrial and safety distributors. I would say that probably 40 to 50% of our distributors have a niche in the cutting tool segment, whereas the rest would be general MRO. And kind of relating to what we do differently, there are other options in what we do, and we have some competitors in the group purchasing area that do a great job. But we go beyond the traditional rebate model, distributor education model, and we try and bring other elements to the lives of the distributors that were touched on actually in your presentation earlier. Technology is a daunting area for many independent operators. I mean, for years, and these are second and third generation, they just want to buy boxes, provide solutions, and sell boxes to fulfill those solutions. And now we've got all of these disruptions out there. And so by taking some of the intimidation factor out of that, we're bringing solutions forward to independent distributors in the areas of allowing them to get into the online catalog game, a big drain on profits for all distributors, and the big publicly traded ones have got this right, and it does feed into the enhanced margins that they are able to make, is just the massive amount of time and the bleed on gross profit that is caused by sending POs to suppliers and fixing orders, errors that occur from too many people touching that PO and entering it into systems. And then a lot of the payment of receivables is all handled manually too. So we're bringing solutions forward to our members in that regard. And that's kind of what we do, that's kind of our thing, is we're a full service group. One thing I'd like to add to that, I heard someone actually sum up my philosophy for me very well, a gentleman named Sandy Mishkin, who is a co-founder of Carpet One, one of the largest cooperatives out there. And he said that if he ever came to work on Monday morning and found out that somehow the government or whatever had abolished rebates, he wanted to be running a group that wouldn't lose a single member. And that's a realization I came to a number of years ago, is we always talk about unlevel playing fields. But every sports team plays in more than one field. You've got your home field, so we'll call that rebates or cost of acquisition, but you've got all of these other playing fields, group purchasing, online e-commerce, internal automation of PO to payment, things like that. And so that's kind of our thing, is that we want to help distributors across the board in all of the playing fields whenever we can centralize things.
Well, Scott, you see a pretty broad range of stuff, and I know you can't name names, but I sure like, we were talking before the program started about all this change that Tom and I were talking about, and where are the distributors in that, and where are the manufacturers, and have you noticed any patterns in terms of how this, we talk about the gap of people that are old school and what's going on with the new? I mean, where are the suppliers in that? Because I'm getting a lot of conflicting information from people.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and actually, when you really break things down, every distributor is different.
Yeah.
But I see a lot more commonality in how the manufacturers or the supplier community are dealing with it. There, without a doubt, and I think there is a factor that's correlated to size. For the most part, the suppliers we deal with are much larger companies than our distributor members are. And they're also structured differently. Many of them are publicly traded entities, so they kind of answer to the beat of a different master than an independently run business or a family operation would be. So I find that the suppliers are employing a very conservative approach. I feel that they're well, you use the term hunker down versus invest.
Yeah.
Far more hunkering down on
Yeah.
the supplier community. I've talked to a number of suppliers where we're looking at doing more with them, and they really, a number of them have just said, "Look, Scott, call me back when I get all my staff back." And I get that. I understand where they're at. Whereas I'll have a distributor that I'll be saying, okay, look, here's some technology we can bring to you at a fraction of the cost because you're going to do it with your fellow members. And he might say, yeah, I thought I'd have all this time available for this, except I have a bunch of staff that aren't here. But he's ready to go, right?
Right. So, well, I mean, but the thing is, and we've seen a lot of this, especially because we do a lot of work in Asia, and they kind of went through this pandemic, and they've had their, they went back to normal, and they've had their reinfection and gone back. And a lot of people changed supplier relationships because some were able to play and some weren't. And the guy that says, call me back when my people are back, a lot of times your members aren't going to sit and wait.
That's right.
There's a risk to that, isn't there?
Well, there's a big risk of that, but I guess for a short period of time, which I think all of us are trying to view this pandemic as a short term, and then every month it goes, okay, we'll add another month onto the end, but it's still always going to be 6 more months, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of these suppliers will tend to refer to the strength of their brand. And let's face it, I'm not saying that they're not contacting our distributors or doing anything like that.
Yep.
It's just that they're not as willing to change yesterday as quickly as some of my members are, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Whereas I'll give you anecdotally, I have a member that during the pandemic went and bought a sterilization company who sterilizes environments. It's a new area for him. I mean, and God bless this guy. He probably saw a great deal out there. Probably didn't have as much money as he needed to have that, but the acquisition cost probably exceeded his resources or the attractiveness of the acquisition.
Right.
And now this gentleman's in the environmental sterilization business.
Which is probably a pretty high growth market at this point, I would think.
Oh, well, yeah.
So that's pretty cool. But I mean, it's that Chinese symbol pinyin, which is a combination of danger and opportunity. And in Chinese writing, when you do the cuneiform and you put the two together, danger and opportunity. And one of the things that's been kind of interesting is some people focus on the danger of the pandemic, and it sounds like that guy focused on the opportunity.
Exactly. And, I've got, we've had opportunities to our business model that have emerged from this. So, for example, and, it came out of PPE.
Okay.
We had one of our members come forward, and one of our suppliers was offering special pricing on half truckloads. So we thought, okay, well, I wonder if they have special pricing on 5 truckloads. And so we went out to our members and we sort of said, look, if the deal warrants it, would you be interested? And we drummed up enough interest, and now and sure enough, we ended up picking up, I think, 3 or 4 truckloads. The members themselves broke the loads out geographically. Right. And so now we have we have a virtual conference coming up. And so now we have a new endeavor that we're going to be getting into, which is entering into group buys, which are domestic, and actually looking at offshore sourcing or / importing, which is just really a group buy from another country.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, for reference, just how many members are in IBC?
We have about 75 or 80 members.
Great, thanks. And I guess overall, you've talked a little bit about it, but in terms of pivoting, and from what Mike and I were talking about earlier, have you seen, what kind of shift have you seen since, obviously everybody was scrambling in the second quarter when there was just incredible amounts of uncertainty. What are you seeing today that's a little bit different among your membership?
Well, the one thing I'll preface is that with our members, especially the ones being in cutting tools, our members do tend to gravitate towards aerospace, automotive, and oil and gas. These are 3 industries you do not want to be in a pandemic. They've been very, very hard hit. And whereas I'll talk to some of our guys and gals that are in MRO, and they are, and this is the funny thing about independence, is they just take the good news and they don't try and understand why sometimes, right? They just go, I am busier beyond belief. And I'll say, well, what's going on? Come on, tell me. So I want to share it with the fellow members. He goes, I don't know why. My customers are just doing great. And we brought in some new lines and things like that. And so, that's fine. Sometimes if you sit back and try and analyze it, you might mess something up, right? And they probably know more than they're letting on. So, but we've had some initiatives that were in place that we've been slowly getting traction on. One is pulling. One of the areas that independent distributors struggle with versus the larger nationals is an online presence. And we understand why. In terms of local quality of reps, the independents tend to win those battles a lot of times. That's really their strength traditionally. And so as the markets evolved and online e-commerce took a bigger hold, and certainly there's a demand for it on the end user side. The large publicly traded companies very wisely have started to exploit the gap with the smaller independents on that front. Don't fight them against the rep of the local independent who's been in the business for 35 years and can write books on solution selling. Let's fight them in e-commerce. And so, we identified this gap, my board of directors at my previous company, and just really said that, online e-commerce used to be a nice to have, and then it became a gotta have. And this is all within 15 years, and now it's pretty much table stakes. And yet it's no less daunting for a $5 million distributor or an $8 million distributor to get into this game and accumulate all that data. Their hands are tied. So that's one of the things that we've been embarking on doing for our members, is creating a centralized 1 to 2 million SKU centralized database. So they really just have to pick the vehicle they want, and we will supply the gas or the electricity, which is data, in order to drive that machine.
So you guys are building the product information manager for all the members.
Correct.
And then they can put whatever front end they want, but the real issue that trips them up is, how do I get the size and the image? And so you're doing that as a group to share the expense. That's a great idea.
Yeah, so this is something that we started in my previous group. It can be done. I only mention that so that it's not a pipe dream. It makes a lot of sense because where groups truly help independence is by centralizing either pain and or repetition of effort. And so if we have 40
What,
members that are
time. That's really interesting what you just said. What do you mean pain?
well, so pain and repetition of effort would apply to getting data from the supplier community. If it was easy to get data, if it was as easy to get raw data as it was to get a glossy sell sheet, I wouldn't need to get into this.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And so if we have 40 of our members that are going to need to get data from YG1, and we have 37 that are going to need to get data from Stanley Black and Decker, et cetera, does it not make, and they're all going to have to allocate 1 to 2 employees to do it. Does it not make sense for IBC to allocate 1 employee or a team of 2 or 3 employees to get that data once and distribute it? It's almost like re-warehousing product, except we're re-warehousing information.
That's
So
cool.
that's kind of the, I don't want to get into a rabbit hole for your show here, but that's the underpinning on how we can help an independent get past that. Because you think the average distributor, if they want to ideally market 125, 175, 200 suppliers, that's a lot of phone calls and a lot of scrubbing of Excel spreadsheets to get.
And then the issue of trying to keep it current is even bigger.
Right, and through the software that we have outsourced, we set up automated algorithms so that it's easy for the suppliers to resubmit their data, and then we just scrub it to see which SKUs changed. And the master database remembers every every distributor that ever ordered that SKU, and it pushes the new data to them.
Yeah, and Scott, there's 2 things that, as you were talking there, I think that were really critical points. And one is that you're talking about data and content as if it were an asset, just as much as inventory. And that's a very different mindset, I think, in terms of historically the way people have looked at that. And it's such a critical thing, I think, in terms of how you approach it. And you may not be able to put a monetary figure on it in terms of the value necessarily in the same way as you do inventory, but you can certainly take a look at the impact of automation, of the customer self-service, the level of engagement that creates, particularly, and this goes back to, this is the other piece, because as you were talking, I went back to the McKinsey survey that Mike and I were talking about that just reinforces this investment in terms of digitization of supply chain by the end customers in this 800-person survey that McKinsey did. But also in terms of, I mean, it's not just the supply chain, it's across all aspects in the automation of business processes within the organizations right now.
Yeah, and since I did this the first time around, a friend of yours, because I know you had him out in Denver at your conference last summer, Justin King.
Mm-hmm.
He always equated opening an online e-commerce site as being an online branch, and most certainly. And so we've always ran with that parallel. Instead of finding a location, you look for an e-commerce platform, and instead of maintaining all that inventory that you're going to need at that bricks and mortar branch, your inventory is, Tom, data. And so it most definitely is an asset for any distributor, or in our case, we'll hold the central asset and redistribute it to those what we call the children underneath the master database.
Yeah.
What's really interesting to me about this whole thing is that they're going back, I don't know, I guess 10 years ago when MDM started to do the concentration studies. How big were the top 5 supplier or top 5 distributors for the market? There was sort of a sense that big guys were going to eat the little guys. And it turns out that's not the case at all, because it's things like this that if you're willing to innovate, Mark Dancer, one of the other research fellows, talked about innovate to dominate. And he's been example after example how size doesn't matter. In a way, it's almost easier if you're a small guy because you can be more nimble. And it's really more about the vision and doing it. And so I think this is just, you take a distributor's $5 or $7 million and all of a sudden they get to, they don't have to be afraid of the big boys and they still have the advantage of the personal local rep.
You're absolutely right. And I want to add to that, Mike, if a smaller distributor develops a very good online shopping experience with excellent search capability, streamlined checkout, et cetera, it's impossible to look small online. Whereas you can clearly drive up to a bricks and mortar branch that's a hole in the wall versus a sprawling publicly traded, and you can say, well, this is a small company. You don't look small online. You look convenient online. You look user-friendly online. So that's where we have, that's a huge playing field that has to get leveled out. And I would even go as far, and this is kind of going into another area that kind of semi keeps me up at night, and I hope it's keeping some of the independent distributors up, is just this adherence to the field sales centric business model that has really been around since Arthur Miller and Death of a Salesman and people pounding the streets. And
I was young back then.
Well, the fact that I even knew who wrote that book is scary. Yeah. And so when you think about it, I mean, field outside sales teams is an element of a business model that has really served industry well for an extremely long period of time. And I do think, I'm certainly not talking about death of a salesman. I mean, let's face it, we are living in an incoming generation of purchasers and end users that are even hungrier for information than their predecessors, arguably. And so it's not that they don't want information, it's just that they don't want to ingest it in the same manner as their predecessors. They don't want to do it over a personal meeting every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. They may give you a meeting, but it's once a month and it'll be a little longer. And boy, you better be prepared for that meeting to come in. We don't need the donuts, we don't need the coffee, but you've got 90 minutes to come in and tell me how you're going to make my job easier. And that's where I think that websites themselves need to take on a bigger role of the independents. Not only are they going to house this online e-shop catalog and ability for a member to manage their own account, but they need to become libraries of all of that great stuff that these 35 and 40-year solution providing employees, before they retire, you need to do a blog drain from them. And dangle these things so they're caught by SEO, but don't finish the article. Sign up and become my customer, and you can log in and see the rest of what I have to share with you.
It's funny you bring that up because, and it's not necessarily size related in terms of size of the company, but there's a lot of companies or distributors that as these guys are older, they're doing these like 5 and 10 minute like web things with Zoom or whatever, recording it. It's just like, so what do you do in this godforsaken situation? And the old guy can go, well, let me give you, there's only 3 options and 2 of them are terrible. But I mean, they can lay all that out and they're capturing, well, it's scar tissue. It's the wisdom you get from being out on the field. So right. I got another question, and I'd be interested in your take on it as well. And we got a question from somebody in the IT distribution side. And a lot of times manufacturers will pay market development funds to distributors, but what they want them to do is use those funds to actually help their downstream customers, whether it's a reseller, how do I make that reseller grow their business? I could be working with a contractor, or they're supposed to be investing those funds to grow the business. And a lot of times the comment was, a lot of times people just raffle the money. They don't spend it or sort of pretend they do, but they really look at it as sort of a back-end profit thing. I mean, what's your view on that? Is this just another one of the manufacturer games, or is it legitimately something that's different? Or how should distributors look at that in terms of their obligation to a supplier that's giving them that money?
Well, if we kind of flip that opinion on its head and turn it around, I used in my previous position when some of my members were starting to use the centralized database and they were opening up their catalogs. The one thing that we forget about Google, like we all hear about SEO and how you get on first page, but part of how you get on first page is being local. And unless a supplier is pay-per-clicking, adding, doing the pay-per-click in virtually every market in the United States, the fact that a group like ours is going to go out and get 20 or 30 or 40 independent distributors out that buy their product, now promoting their product online because it's part of their online catalog.
Because it's local.
Exactly. And so,
wow.
if I'm located in upstate Pennsylvania and I'm looking for a Makita certain orbital sander and I put that part number in, the guy who carries that in Northern California is going to come up on page 87. Whereas the guy who's carrying it in Pittsburgh is going to come up on page 1, quite likely. And that's key. So we actually told our distributors, when you get your catalog up and running, you're actually going to be driving more sales because you're advertising that company's products to people who are looking for those products in your local market, and you should be claiming co-op from your suppliers to help you offset the cost of getting your catalog up and running.
By the way, it is my orbital sander, just for the record. But one other, well, I mean, just in terms of the comment, in terms of downstream partners, one of the problems with resellers, a lot of times they're small and they really don't want help, and so in terms of that market development funds, it should be spent wisely, not just sprayed out and spread between the resellers. It should go to the people that are really trying to build a business. So yeah. So I think that your local point I thought was really powerful.
Yeah.
I had, I'm supposed to be the smart guy. I love doing these things because you always pick up something new,
Well, and Scott, what you described really is this whole redefinition of the funnel and the front end sales process. Really, I mean, it's totally reoriented around a number of components, and one of those is the SEO and search piece, and that's critical. But there's a whole other content piece there, and you mentioned it in terms of extracting the knowledge that the experienced people in the company have, and that's a huge amount of leverage in terms of adding to that local presence as well. That also differentiates a lot from some of the larger nationals, just that may not have that higher level of solution providing. So there's a number of layers here, but what I think has really characterized and what's happening this year, just to go back to wrap up what we've been talking about, is this is all accelerating into it used to be rocket science, 5 years ago, and you had to throw a lot of money at it. That's not true. I mean, it still requires investment, but it's just at a whole different lower level than what it was even a few years ago. And that's going to continue to come down.
That's right. And my bit to kind of wrap a bow around this. So I had, we do these community calls with our members where we bring them together into chat rooms and allow them to share best practices. So obviously you can imagine what the theme of the May community call was, how are you coping, right? So we did start talking about sales reps, and one of the members brought up, so I understand what you're saying, Scott, and how the heck are we going to cold call? How the hell are we going to find new customers in this new world? And I didn't have a great answer for him at that time, but it was just within the last week. And I think it might've been from something out of your, some literature out of Elizabeth, maybe, Tom.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
Take credit, Tom.
That she had written, but it said that in 75% of new business interactions right now in distribution, the customer is finding the supplier. Mm-hmm. That is completely the opposite of what we have grown up with, is where you have to pound the pavement, to find your new business. And now I think people, one of the things that came out of this particular community call is everybody locally knows each other in social media. You know it because of the football field, or what's going on at the church, and that's where you're kind of connecting with people, is actually outside of business.
Absolutely.
Your
Yeah.
local people.
So that's a great way to wrap up. We've come to the top of the hour, and once again, a great conversation. Scott, always a pleasure to talk with you, and thanks so much for taking some time with this. And Mike, I'll see you next month. We are getting back together on October 16th, and we're already starting to line up a great program. So thanks to you both, and thanks for everybody for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Everybody should have a good weekend.
It was an honor.
Take care, guys. Thanks for watching. See you. Bye.